The first thing I saw was the little girl running straight toward me across the reunion lawn with tears in her eyes and absolute certainty on her face. Before anyone could stop her, she wrapped her tiny arms around my waist and whispered words that made every laugh, every conversation, and every cheerful memory around us disappear. "Mommy said you'd come. She promised you'd still keep your promises, even if she couldn't." Then I looked up and saw the woman I had loved 22 years earlier standing only a few yards away, dressed in black, wearing the quiet expression of someone who had survived far more than anyone should. She had come back to our reunion a widow, and in that single heartbreaking moment I realized that some promises never truly die. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps our community continue sharing stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be. Every class reunion carries ghosts. Mine arrived beneath bright blue skies on a warm September afternoon at the old lakeside park where our graduating class had gathered after more than 2 decades apart. The place looked almost untouched. Families spread blankets beneath tall maple trees, children chased one another across the grass, and familiar faces carried unfamiliar lines carved by time. I had almost talked myself out of coming. My career as a landscape architect had taken me across several states, and I had spent years convincing myself that the past belonged exactly where it was. Yet something inside me had insisted that I return, even if only for a few hours. I didn't know then that fate had been quietly arranging a reunion far different from the one printed on the invitation. Long before adulthood complicated everything, there had been only 2 people who believed the world could never separate them. My name was Graham, and hers was Meredith. We had met during our first week of high school when she accidentally spilled paint across one of my sketchbooks in art class. Instead of apologizing with embarrassment, she laughed until everyone else laughed with her, then stayed after school helping me redraw every page. That single afternoon became hundreds more. We dreamed about traveling together, buying a small farmhouse someday, and raising children who would never doubt they were loved. We believed those dreams because young hearts rarely imagine that life has other plans. Reality arrived faster than either of us expected. My father suffered a serious stroke during my senior year, and I abandoned a scholarship opportunity to remain close to home and help my family survive. Meredith earned admission to a university several states away. We promised distance would never defeat us, but months became harder. Letters arrived less frequently. Phone calls grew shorter. Misunderstandings filled the empty spaces where trust once lived. Neither of us cheated. Neither stopped loving the other. We simply became 2 young people carrying burdens too heavy to explain. Eventually one heartbreaking letter arrived saying she believed we deserved the freedom to build separate futures instead of waiting for circumstances that might never change. I never answered. Pride can be astonishingly expensive. Years passed with surprising speed. I built a respected career, surrounded myself with work, and politely avoided every conversation about marriage. Friends assumed I simply hadn't found the right person. The truth was simpler and sadder. I compared everyone to someone who no longer belonged to my life. Time softened the pain but never erased it. As I wandered through the reunion greeting old classmates, stories of careers, grandchildren, illnesses, and victories floated through the afternoon air. Someone pointed toward the entrance and quietly mentioned that Meredith had finally arrived. My heartbeat stumbled before my eyes even found her. She looked different, of course. Time had placed gentle silver threads through her chestnut hair, and grief rested behind her smile with unmistakable permanence. Yet I recognized her instantly. Some people never stop feeling familiar. Beside her walked a little girl no older than 7 with bright curious eyes and freckles scattered across her cheeks. The child skipped happily while Meredith carried herself with the careful strength of someone determined not to burden anyone else. Then the little girl saw me. Everything that followed happened so quickly that I barely understood it until her arms wrapped around me and those impossible words escaped her lips. "Mommy said you'd come." Meredith reached us seconds later, clearly embarrassed and overwhelmed. She apologized softly, explaining that her daughter, Clara, had heard countless stories about someone named Graham while they drove to the reunion. Clara simply smiled with innocent confidence, convinced she had finally met someone already important in her life. For a long moment neither Meredith nor I knew where to begin, but we eventually found two empty chairs overlooking the lake while Clara wandered toward a nearby craft table with other children. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh grass as Meredith slowly unfolded the years that had separated us. After college she had married a kind emergency physician named Owen. He had been everything a good husband should be: steady, generous, patient, and deeply devoted to his family. Together they built a beautiful life centered around service, friendship, and eventually the joyful arrival of Clara. Then, 3 years earlier, a devastating highway accident claimed Owen's life while he was driving home after covering an extra hospital shift for a colleague. Meredith survived because she had stayed home with Clara that evening. She admitted she had spent countless mornings wondering whether gratitude for surviving and guilt for surviving could exist inside the same heart. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She simply spoke with the honesty of someone exhausted from pretending everything was fine. When she finished, she surprised me by reaching into her purse and removing a small, weathered envelope. It was the final letter I had never answered. She confessed she had carried it through every move, every season of her marriage, every difficult year, because she never found the courage to throw it away. She had believed my silence meant I had stopped caring. Only recently had she discovered, through an old mutual friend, that my father had required constant care for years after his stroke and that my entire future had changed almost overnight. She finally understood that my silence had not been indifference. It had been survival mixed with wounded pride. I admitted I had believed she had chosen a happier life without looking back. Both of us smiled sadly at how two good people had lost decades because neither had asked one more question. Clara returned carrying a handmade bracelet woven from colorful strings. Without hesitation she tied it around my wrist and proudly announced that every hero needed something colorful because life was already serious enough. Her cheerful wisdom made Meredith laugh for the first time that afternoon, and hearing that familiar laugh felt like watching sunlight return after years of heavy clouds. The reunion slowly transformed into something neither of us expected. We walked through old classrooms during the campus tour, remembering harmless pranks, forgotten teachers, and youthful dreams. Instead of reopening old wounds, those memories reminded us how much kindness had once existed between us before fear and circumstance took over. As the afternoon drew toward its golden hours, Clara wandered into the small memorial garden dedicated to former students who had passed away. She quietly read each engraved name despite being too young to know any of them. Then she asked Meredith whether people disappeared forever when they died. Meredith paused, searching for words, before she answered. Clara looked toward me. She said, "Mommy always tells me people stay alive when we keep choosing love instead of giving up." The simplicity of that statement settled deeply inside all three of us. Over the following months, what began as exchanged phone numbers slowly became regular conversations. There were no dramatic declarations or impossible coincidences. Healing happened through ordinary afternoons. I helped Clara build a treehouse she proudly called the Friendship Fort. Meredith encouraged me to begin painting again after discovering I had abandoned art decades earlier. We attended school plays, community festivals, charity walks, and countless weekend breakfasts where laughter gradually replaced awkward silence. Still, grief does not vanish simply because happiness returns. One spring afternoon Meredith admitted she struggled with feeling guilty whenever she smiled too much. Loving life again sometimes felt like betraying Owen's memory. She worried Clara might someday believe her father had been forgotten. I reminded her that love is not a room with only one chair. The people who truly love us never ask us to remain lonely as proof that they mattered. Owen had spent his life healing strangers. Everything I had learned about him suggested he would want the people he loved most to keep living fully. Several weeks later Meredith invited me to visit Owen's favorite hiking overlook, where she and Clara celebrated his birthday every year. We packed sandwiches, climbed beneath brilliant afternoon sunshine, and shared stories about the remarkable man whose kindness still shaped their lives. I realized I was not competing with a memory. I was honoring it. Clara carefully released a handful of wildflower seeds into the breeze because she believed beautiful things should keep growing. That moment quietly changed everything. Months later, during Clara's elementary school family appreciation event, every child introduced someone they admired. Many chose parents or grandparents. Clara stood proudly before the audience and spoke about 3 people instead of 1. She thanked her mother for teaching courage, her Father in heaven for teaching kindness through the stories she heard every day, and me for proving that promises could survive even when people believed they were broken forever. There was not a dry eye in the room. Life continued moving forward with gentle confidence. Meredith eventually accepted that loving again did not erase her past. I accepted that forgiving myself mattered just as much as forgiving old misunderstandings. Clara continued reminding both of us that children often understand hope better than adults. On another bright autumn afternoon, exactly 2 years after our reunion, we returned to the same lakeside park where everything had changed. Friends from our graduating class happened to be gathering for a community picnic, and many recognized us immediately. This time there was no sadness waiting at the entrance. Instead, Clara raced ahead laughing exactly as she had before, only now she turned back halfway across the lawn to make sure we were walking together. She no longer needed to wonder whether I would come, she already knew. As we stood beneath the same maple trees where fate had reunited us, Meredith quietly slipped her hand into mine. There were no grand speeches. Some moments become perfect because they ask for nothing more than gratitude. Before we finish this story, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a second chance, forgiven someone after many years, or discovered that hope arrived when you least expected it? Please leave a meaningful comment and share the lesson this journey reminded you of. The years we lost could never be returned, but the years ahead became a gift we refused to waste. We learned that forgiveness does not rewrite history, yet it transforms the future. We discovered that grief and joy can walk side by side without diminishing each other. Most importantly, we learned that promises made from genuine love sometimes wait patiently across decades until the right moment finally arrives. The little girl who once ran across a reunion lawn believing someone would keep a promise she barely understood grew up surrounded by proof that compassion can rebuild what regret once destroyed. And every time I looked at the colorful bracelet she had tied around my wrist that unforgettable afternoon, I remembered that hope often enters our lives in the smallest hands carrying the biggest faith. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Thank you for being part of our community, where every story reminds us that kindness, forgiveness, and love can still change lives when we choose not to give up. If you'd like, I can also